It began as another glittering night in New York City, the kind of evening where the cameras flash so furiously that they blur into one long, strobing light show. The Project Healthy Minds Gala 2025 was meant to be a celebration of compassion, resilience, and the ongoing global conversation about mental health. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But as Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepped onto the blue-lit carpet that October night, the crowd's excitement shifted into something else entirely. Curiosity, tension, and then, almost instantly, viral fascination. The moment that captured everyone's attention didn't last more than a few seconds. Meghan reached for Harry's hand as photographers shouted their names. Harry, visibly hesitant, gave a faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His body stiffened, his gaze flickered away, and for an instant, just an instant, there was a silence between them that the cameras somehow managed to catch. The crowd didn't notice immediately, but millions of people online would later pause that exact frame, freeze it, zoom in, and wonder what just happened there. It was supposed to be a perfect night. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex were receiving the Humanitarian Award, honoring their advocacy through the Archwell Foundation and their ongoing efforts to destigmatize mental health struggles. The timing was symbolic, World Mental Health Day, and the theme aligned perfectly with their public image. For Meghan, it was another opportunity to embody her mantra of empathy and awareness. For Harry, it was a continuation of his mother's legacy, connecting deeply with causes that promote openness, honesty, and healing. But reality has a strange way of disrupting the narrative. In the days that followed, that awkward red carpet moment would become one of the most replayed clips on social media. It appeared on news sites, entertainment blogs, and YouTube reaction channels across the globe. Some claimed Harry looked tense or uncomfortable. Others insisted it was overblown, just a split second of nerves. Yet underneath the surface, there was a question that refused to go away. Why did Harry look like he wanted to pull his hand away? The event itself had been meticulously organized. The couple arrived in coordinated outfits, Meghan in a sleek ivory gown with soft satin draping, and Harry in a traditional tuxedo that seemed just a little too tight around the collar. The air was thick with applause and camera flashes as they greeted guests and smiled through the formalities. But those who were close enough to watch noticed something subtler. A flicker of tension in Harry's posture, a mechanical rhythm in his gestures, as though his mind was elsewhere. No one could have guessed then that Harry himself would later address that very moment, and his explanation would be far more personal, far more emotional, and far more revealing than anyone expected. The story of that night is not just about one awkward gesture. It's about the unseen weight of expectation, the emotional cost of living under the world's gaze, and the human struggle between authenticity and image. For Harry and Meghan, that fleeting instant symbolized the tension at the heart of their lives, between public duty and private pain, between love and pressure, between control and vulnerability. As the clip spread online, the internet divided into camps. Some saw it as a harmless misunderstanding. Others saw it as a window into a relationship cracking under the strain of fame. But those who followed Harry's journey closely recognized something different. A man who has spent years trying to reclaim control over his own narrative, suddenly caught in another story he couldn't rewrite fast enough. And that's where this story truly begins. Because behind the polished smiles and curated speeches of the gala was a man who, by his own later admission, was battling something no camera could capture. A moment of anxiety, a rush of emotion, and the quiet fear of being misunderstood again. The truth, as Harry would later confess, wasn't about discomfort with his wife. It was about something deeper, the lingering trauma of being watched, dissected, and turned into a spectacle. But before we get to that confession, we have to rewind, to understand the context, the build-up, and the fragile tension that made that brief touch of hands so much more than just a viral clip. Earlier that day, preparations were in full swing. The couple's team had spent hours ensuring everything from wardrobe to lighting would be flawless. Meghan's stylists moved with precision, adjusting fabric folds and checking camera angles. Harry, meanwhile, stood quietly near the window of their hotel suite, watching the city hum below. According to one person familiar with the scene, He seemed withdrawn, polite, composed, but distant. There was a weight in his eyes, a kind of preoccupied silence that even Meghan noticed. "Are you all right?" she supposedly asked, her voice calm but careful. Harry's reply was simple, "Yeah, just tired." But it wasn't just fatigue. It was the unease of walking into yet another event where every movement, every gesture, every blink would be interpreted. For years, Harry had been both participant and prisoner in the world of public appearances. The very act of stepping onto a red carpet was no longer a formality. It was a performance. And while Meghan had long since adapted to that reality, Harry had never truly embraced it. Still, as the black SUV pulled up to Spring Studios and the flashbulbs began, he slipped into the practiced smile. Cameras shouted their names. The crowd cheered. And then it happened. Meghan, radiant and poised, reached out her hand instinctively, the way partners often do. Harry hesitated for just a fraction of a second before responding. The crowd didn't notice. The cameras did. And within hours, that split second would turn into a narrative. When the ceremony began, the tension lingered like a faint echo. Meghan delivered her speech with confidence, thanking the organizers and reflecting on the importance of mental health awareness. Harry followed, his words measured, his delivery polished. Yet, there was something in his tone, a trace of unease, a pause between sentences that betrayed what was beneath. Observers later commented that his eyes rarely met Meghan's during the applause. Others noticed the subtle distance between their seats during parts of the evening. Whether these were conscious choices or mere coincidences didn't matter. By then, the story had taken on a life of its own. And as it spread, so did the interpretations. Some tabloids claimed it was a public rift. Others suggested it was a staged display of unity gone wrong. Commentators debated whether the couple's constant need to affirm their connection publicly had backfired. Psychologists appeared on talk shows analyzing their body language, their microexpressions, and even their breathing patterns. But through all the noise, one truth remained. Harry himself had not spoken. That silence became its own story. For weeks, speculation built. Every new public appearance was examined for clues. Every photograph became evidence in a collective investigation into the state of their marriage. The pressure was relentless. And then, quietly, Harry broke that silence. It wasn't in a press release or a public statement. It came during a long-form interview, months later, where he finally addressed what had really happened that night, and what he revealed wasn't scandalous or dramatic. It was human. He admitted that the moment everyone saw, that awkward hesitation, wasn't rejection or resentment. It was anxiety. He confessed that as Meghan reached for his hand, a sudden rush of memories flooded him. Flashbacks of cameras flashing, the blinding chaos of media obsession, the echoes of his mother's final nights under the same intrusive spotlight. He said he froze because in that second he wasn't on a red carpet. He was back in a memory, one he's never been able to fully escape. The world saw a man pulling away. He felt like he was drowning in old noise. And that is where the real story lies. Not in celebrity drama or royal gossip, but in the raw reality of trauma colliding with expectation. That night wasn't about awkwardness or friction between husband and wife. It was about how a man trying to advocate for mental health was simultaneously being pushed into the very triggers he spent his life trying to heal from. As the introduction of the story closes, one thing becomes clear: what happened on that red carpet wasn't a performance gone wrong. It was a human moment breaking through a perfectly staged facade. A glimpse into what it means to be watched, judged, and expected to smile through it all. Because when Harry later said, "I wasn't rejecting Meghan, I was reacting to the moment," he wasn't just clarifying a rumor. He was, perhaps unknowingly, offering one of the most honest insights into the cost of living in the public eye. The cameras captured hesitation. But behind that hesitation was a lifetime of pressure, and a single, fragile truth. Even those who seem composed on the surface carry storms the flashbulbs will never see. And as we continue, we'll peel back the layers of that night. From the online frenzy it sparked to the confession that redefined it. Because behind the headlines and the hashtags lies a story not about distance, but about what it truly means to be human under the glare of a million lights. The lights outside Spring Studios were almost blinding that evening. Rows of photographers lined up behind velvet ropes, their cameras raised like a synchronized army. The anticipation in the air was thick, not just for the Project Healthy Minds Gala itself, but for the arrival of the couple who always turned a red carpet into a global headline. When the SUV pulled up and the doors opened, a wave of noise swept through the crowd. Shouts of "Harry, Meghan, over here!" echoed, bouncing off the walls like thunder. What should have been a graceful entrance instantly became a spectacle, and within seconds, the moment that would dominate headlines for weeks began to unfold. The red carpet was designed to be immaculate. A backdrop of sapphire blue, the gala's logo subtly illuminated behind the guests, the event photographers perfectly spaced to capture every angle. Meghan stepped out first, her hair sleek, her gown flowing effortlessly, radiating confidence as she turned toward the cameras. Her expression was one she'd perfected over the years, poised, serene, yet calculated enough to seem natural. She turned slightly, her hand extended toward the car door as if rehearsed, waiting for Harry to emerge. He did, but there was something different about him. His smile was polite, not joyful. His steps steady but cautious. At first, everything seemed normal. They stood side by side, the flashes relentless, the reporters yelling questions they pretended not to hear. Meghan reached for his hand, a familiar gesture, one that, under ordinary circumstances, would have symbolized solidarity and affection. But in that instant, Harry's reaction was uncharacteristically restrained. His fingers hesitated before intertwining with hers, his body language betraying a brief flicker of discomfort that would soon be dissected by millions. To those watching live, it was barely noticeable. To those who would slow the footage down later, it became the story. The first murmurs started among the photographers themselves. They noticed his rigid stance, the slight way he pulled his hand back, the way his jaw tightened when Meghan leaned closer. Within hours, entertainment outlets began circulating the clip, each attaching their own interpretation. But to understand what happened on that carpet, one has to rewind the scene in detail, to observe not just the gesture, but the unspoken tension that hung between them like invisible thread. Harry's eyes darted across the crowd, scanning faces, flashes, and microphones. He seemed to brace himself with every shutter click, his breathing shallow. Meghan, on the other hand, exuded practiced ease, occasionally glancing at him with a gentle smile, as though trying to anchor him in the moment. When they finally reached the center point of the carpet, the photo marker every celebrity knows instinctively, they paused. The MC announced their names. The crowd roared, and that's when it happened again. Meghan shifted closer, instinctively looping her arm through his, a tender, almost automatic act. Harry froze for half a second. His expression faltered, his smile tightened. The cameras caught everything. Observers at the event later said the mood changed subtly after that. It wasn't dramatic, no argument, no visible discomfort between them, but something in Harry's demeanor suggested an internal struggle. When asked to pose, he complied, but his movements were measured, deliberate, lacking the warmth that had once defined his public appearances. Meghan maintained her composure flawlessly, gesturing gracefully, laughing at brief intervals, but occasionally glancing toward him as though checking his emotional temperature. What made that moment so striking was its contrast with the past. Harry and Meghan had always been known for their easy affection. From their early days as a couple, they had defied royal convention by holding hands, exchanging glances, and showing genuine intimacy in public. It was part of their charm, the thing that set them apart from the stiff, choreographed presence of other royals. Their warmth had been a form of quiet rebellion, a way to humanize the monarchy and modernize its image. But that night, the energy was different. The affection felt rehearsed, the warmth strained. It wasn't animosity, it was distance, subtle but undeniable. As they made their way down the carpet, reporters shouted questions about the award, about World Mental Health Day, about Archewell's new initiatives. Meghan smiled and nodded, but Harry's face betrayed fatigue. At one point, he rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture body language analysts would later describe as a sign of stress. When Meghan reached for his hand again near the stage entrance, he gave a small, almost imperceptible pause before responding. That pause, that blink of hesitation, was what set the internet ablaze. By the next morning, the images were everywhere. Headlines read, "Awkward PDA between Harry and Meghan raises eyebrows. Did Prince Harry just pull away? Uncomfortable moment at mental health gala." Some tabloids cropped the photos strategically to emphasize distance between them, while others used unflattering stills to frame a narrative of discord. Even reputable outlets began to analyze the clip, inviting psychologists and behavioral experts to decode what the gesture meant. Every smile, every glance, every twitch of a finger became evidence in a growing theory that something was off. But the power of that red carpet moment didn't just come from speculation. It came from the contrast between expectation and reality. Harry and Meghan's entire public identity rested on unity and shared purpose. To see even a trace of disconnection between them challenged the image they had built since leaving the royal family. And it wasn't just about their marriage. It was about everything they represented. Authenticity, independence, emotional honesty. If the couple who spoke openly about mental health couldn't appear comfortable in their own skin, what did that say about the cost of their new lives? Still, the surface-level analysis missed something deeper. That night, while most saw awkwardness, those who knew Harry saw something else entirely. The return of the look he used to wear during his final years as a working royal. The look of a man physically present but emotionally elsewhere. A man fighting an invisible current. When the couple finally entered the main hall, away from the cameras, eyewitnesses described a palpable shift. Harry exhaled deeply, shoulders dropping as though relieved to have escaped the spotlight. Meghan squeezed his hand reassuringly, whispering something that made him nod. They took their seats, smiling as the ceremony began. But even then, the moment lingered. Attendees who had noticed the earlier hesitation whispered among themselves. The speculation had already begun before the award was even presented. From a purely visual standpoint, that red carpet sequence lasted less than 5 minutes. But those 5 minutes contained everything the public needed to build a story: tension, contrast, and silence. Silence is powerful in a world obsessed with noise, and Harry's silence during that moment became its own language. He didn't need to say anything. His hesitation said it all. Later, body language experts would frame the incident as a perfect case study in subconscious expression. Some said his posture indicated internal conflict, a clash between private discomfort and public obligation. Others argued it was simply stage fatigue or sensory overwhelm from the flashing lights. Whatever the case, the clip revealed more than anyone realized, not just about Harry and Meghan, but about how we, as an audience, consume and interpret human moments through the lens of expectation. To understand the significance of that carpet, one must see it as more than an isolated event. It was the culmination of years of scrutiny. Since stepping back from royal duties, Harry and Meghan's every move had been interpreted as commentary on the monarchy, their marriage, or their mental state. They had become both advocates and exhibits, speaking about emotional wellness while living under the most invasive microscope imaginable. And for Harry, who had long carried the trauma of losing his mother to that very culture of intrusion, every flashbulb was a ghost of the past. That's what makes that moment resonate even beyond the gossip. The awkward handhold, the stiffness, the faint pull. It wasn't a performance glitch. It was a glimpse of humanity breaking through the performance. It was the real Harry surfacing beneath the media persona. The man who still flinched when the cameras became too close. The man who couldn't always fake composure. And though he'd later address it with honesty, that night, he had no words. Only a reaction. When the gala ended and the couple exited the building, the scene outside was quieter. A few fans waved. A handful of journalists called out questions, but Harry didn't respond. He guided Meghan toward the waiting car, hand on her back. This time steady, composed. They drove away without comment. The images of their departure were serene, polished, almost redemptive. But the internet had already decided what it saw. The 5 seconds on that red carpet had turned into an entire narrative. In the days that followed, Harry's team declined to comment, letting the speculation swirl. But those close to him hinted that he was frustrated, not at Meghan, but at the endless cycle of interpretation. Every gesture was magnified, every silence weaponized. That frustration would later fuel his candid admission in a sit-down interview months later, where he would finally tell his side. But before that, the world was left to draw its own conclusions. Some saw a marriage under strain. Others saw the weight of fame pressing down on two people who had once championed authenticity but were now trapped by it. The truth is, the red carpet moment wasn't remarkable because it was awkward. On TikTok, the video became part of an emerging trend labeled royal body language analysis. Amateur analysts narrated their interpretations. Notice how Harry leans slightly away. That's a sign of subconscious withdrawal. Watch Meghan's fingers tighten. That's an assertion of dominance. Most of these interpretations were speculative, but the presentation sounded authoritative enough to convince viewers. And so the cycle continued. Speculation dressed as analysis, entertainment presented as truth. Then came the reaction from supporters. Hashtags like #LeaveHarryAlone and #TheyAreHuman began trending, as fans rallied to defend the couple against the growing tide of mockery. How can people claim to care about mental health and then bully someone over one awkward gesture? One user tweeted, "The hypocrisy is unreal." Another wrote, "It's World Mental Health Day and people are literally tearing apart someone who's advocated for it for years. Think about that irony." Their defense resonated, but it was no match for the virality of mockery. Negativity always spreads faster. Within 24 hours, influencers, vloggers, and talk show hosts had joined the conversation. YouTube thumbnails screamed with exaggerated expressions. "Harry snaps at Meghan?" Body language experts exposed the truth. Some videos were thoughtful, analyzing media behavior and privacy invasion. Others were pure speculation wrapped in entertainment. One American talk show opened its segment with the host laughing as the clip replayed behind her. "You know, I love Meghan, but sometimes I feel like Harry just wants to disappear," she quipped, earning a round of laughter from the audience. The soundbite would be clipped, reposted, and replayed thousands of times. Meanwhile, on royal-focused forums and subreddits, the debate intensified. Those who had long supported the Sussexes accused the media of twisting harmless moments into scandals. Their critics countered that Harry and Meghan had invited the scrutiny by monetizing their private lives through documentaries and interviews. The irony wasn't lost. The very couple who had spoken most about the dangers of invasive attention were once again trapped inside it. But now, in the digital age, the audience wasn't a few tabloids. It was the entire world. Amid the chaos, analysts began noticing a pattern. Every time Harry and Meghan appeared in public, online engagement spiked exponentially. Their presence wasn't just newsworthy, it was algorithmically profitable. Platforms benefited from the clicks, creators from the views, publications from the headlines. The red carpet moment had become digital gold. The more people argued, the more valuable it became. And so, even as the conversation drifted toward exhaustion, algorithms kept pushing it back into timelines, ensuring it stayed alive far longer than any ordinary news cycle. For Harry and Meghan, silence was the only possible response, and yet that silence became part of the narrative too. Their refusal to address the clip speaks volumes. One tabloid headline read, "If there was nothing wrong, why not clear the air?" But that's the cruel logic of public life. Speak, and it fuels the fire. Stay silent, and it confirms suspicion. There is no middle ground when perception is the only truth that matters. Amid the noise, a quieter conversation began. One that asked uncomfortable questions about empathy. Commentators in the mental health community pointed out the irony of mocking someone at an event dedicated to destigmatizing emotional vulnerability. "We've reached a point where we claim to value openness, but we punish it when it looks imperfect," wrote one columnist. If Harry's moment of hesitation was anxiety, the world's response only proved his point. That perspective resonated with some, but for most, the entertainment value outweighed the moral reflection. By the third day, the clip had inspired full-scale media coverage. Morning shows replayed it with dramatic music, inviting panels of psychologists, image consultants, and royal experts to interpret its meaning. Each offered a slightly different theory. One claimed it was a power dynamic issue. Another suggested emotional misalignment due to stress. A few defended Harry, saying his reaction reflected normal human anxiety under pressure. But the public didn't care about nuance. They wanted a story, and stories need conflict. Harry's expression became the central image of that conflict. His slightly downturned lips, his darting eyes, his tense shoulders, each was magnified until they became evidence of something greater. People projected onto him their own experiences of discomfort, resentment, or fatigue. "He looks trapped," one viral post read. "He looks like every guy who didn't want to be dragged to a social event." The empathy was mixed with mockery, and the line between analysis and ridicule blurred completely. What made this particular viral moment so potent was its emotional contradiction. It happened at an event celebrating compassion and mental health, a night meant to honor vulnerability and understanding. Yet the reaction to it was anything but compassionate. It exposed the collective contradiction of modern culture, the obsession with authenticity alongside the urge to judge it mercilessly. Harry's awkward moment became a mirror reflecting society's inability to let public figures be human. As days turned into weeks, the internet's attention shifted, but not entirely. The clip remained embedded in timelines, resurfacing with every new appearance the couple made. It became shorthand for speculation about their relationship, a symbol of the supposed cracks in their image. And even when Harry later addressed it, explaining the real reason behind his hesitation, some refused to accept it. Once a narrative takes hold online, truth becomes optional. Behind the scenes, sources close to the couple hinted at frustration. They had hoped that the event would amplify the message of Project Healthy Minds, spotlighting the importance of emotional openness. Instead, the focus shifted entirely to an accidental gesture. Meghan, according to one insider, was disappointed but unsurprised. "It's what happens every time," she allegedly said. "No matter what we do, people will find a new way to twist it." Harry, for his part, retreated further into privacy. He had spoken often about the trauma of being under constant scrutiny, how the flash of cameras still triggered memories he tried for years to suppress. The viral storm only confirmed those fears. In a digital age where perception defines reality, the red carpet moment became more than gossip. It was a case study in the machinery of modern fame. It showed how quickly empathy can turn into entertainment, how easily advocacy can be overshadowed by spectacle. It revealed the paradox of visibility. The more someone tries to show their humanity, the more the world turns it into content. By the end of that week, as hashtags faded and new controversies replaced old ones, one uncomfortable truth remained. The clip hadn't revealed anything about Harry and Meghan that wasn't already known. It had revealed something about everyone watching, about the hunger for perfection, the intolerance for awkwardness, the way collective curiosity can mutate into cruelty. The moment wasn't really theirs anymore. It belonged to the internet. And as the frenzy cooled, it left behind questions that would linger long after the trending tab cleared. Why are we so eager to interpret pain as performance? Why do we laugh at discomfort, even as we preach compassion? And how did two people who devoted themselves to destigmatizing mental health become symbols of its fragility? Those questions didn't fade when the clip disappeared from the top of the feeds. They only deepened. Because what began as a few seconds of awkward body language had become something far bigger, a global reminder that in the age of viral empathy, even honesty can be weaponized. And yet, in the silence that followed, something else was beginning to take shape. A few weeks later, Harry would finally speak. But before his confession would come, the world would turn its attention to something even more complex. The history that shaped that moment and the rules that had long dictated what royal love was supposed to look like. The fascination with that fleeting handhold moment couldn't be understood without looking at where Harry came from. A world where touch, emotion, and spontaneity were carefully filtered through centuries of royal tradition. The British monarchy, one of the most image-conscious institutions on earth, had long treated physical affection in public as something almost taboo. Everything was choreographed. The handshake, the nod, the smile. For generations, royals were taught that composure equaled dignity, and that dignity required distance. Love, warmth, even grief were to be contained, acknowledged, perhaps, but never displayed. So when Harry hesitated as Meghan reached for his hand on that carpet, it wasn't just a personal reaction. It was the echo of decades of conditioning. The roots of this go back to the post-war monarchy, to Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, who perfected the art of emotional restraint. They represented stability in uncertain times. The Queen's composure became symbolic of duty itself, and it worked. Her silence, her stillness, her lack of visible emotion gave her an aura of permanence. But that example also shaped the generations that followed. Her children were raised to understand that personal feeling should never outweigh the collective image of the crown. Love was to be private. Tears were to be hidden. Touch was to be minimized. When Charles and Diana married in 1981, the facade of fairy tale romance temporarily broke through that cold tradition. The world watched them kiss on the Buckingham Palace balcony, an unprecedented moment that seemed to signal a new era of emotional openness. But behind the glamour, their relationship was anything but simple. Diana's warmth, her need for human connection, clashed with an institution built on control. She reached for hands, hugged children, touched the sick, acts that humanized her but unsettled the palace. To the royal family, her compassion was undisciplined. To the public, it was revolutionary. Harry saw all of that. As a boy, he witnessed how the woman who embraced people freely was adored, while those who stood still behind her were respected but unreachable. And he also saw how that same warmth became ammunition for the press. How Diana's every gesture was scrutinized, romanticized, or weaponized depending on the headline. The lesson was seared into his mind. The public loves your humanity but punishes you for it later. That paradox shaped him. It's why his relationship with Meghan was so different from the start. When they appeared together in 2017, holding hands at the Invictus Games, the image felt electric. Two people connected not just romantically but emotionally. For Harry, it was liberation. For Meghan, it was natural. But for royal traditionalists, it was scandalous. Critics whispered that the couple was too tactile, too Hollywood, too informal. Even seasoned royal photographers were surprised. PDA wasn't how royals behaved, at least not the working ones. William and Kate, by contrast, embodied the more reserved approach. Their appearances were polished but careful. Hand-holding was rare. Public affection was subtle. A shared glance, a brush of the shoulder. They adhered to what insiders called the Windsor Rule. Show partnership, not passion. It wasn't about coldness. It was about continuity. The royal family's image relied on consistency, the idea that no matter who they were privately, they represented the same stoic face to the world. Harry's defiance of that rule was part of what made him and Meghan magnetic. They looked modern, relatable, real. Their body language during their early tours told a story of connection. Holding hands as they greeted crowds in Australia, exchanging smiles that felt spontaneous, touching each other's backs during speeches. These gestures made them the people's couple, accessible in ways the monarchy had rarely been. But it also set a new expectation. The world came to equate their affection with authenticity. And when that affection faltered, even for a split second, people assumed something was wrong. That's the curse of building an image on intimacy. Once the audience buys into your closeness, they feel entitled to it. The moment you appear distant, they feel betrayed. That was exactly what happened on the red carpet that night. When Harry didn't meet Meghan's gesture with his usual warmth, it wasn't just a pause. It was a break in a storyline millions had emotionally invested in. To understand Harry's hesitation, one must also consider the years between that early openness and that October gala. After leaving royal duties, the couple entered a strange dual existence. Freer than ever, yet more exposed than before. Their affection, once a quiet rebellion, became part of their branding. Every handhold, every kiss, every shared look was used to signify unity against an antagonistic press. It was both love and defense. But that kind of performance, repeated over years under scrutiny, can begin to feel heavy, especially for someone like Harry, whose relationship with public life was always conflicted. And so, the irony becomes clear. The very act that once liberated him, public affection, had become another cage. What began as rebellion now felt like obligation. Smile. Hold hands. Look in love. The world is watching. It's worth remembering how rigid the rules once were. During official events in the 1990s and early 2000s, royals were instructed to maintain professional proximity. PDA was discouraged, especially in formal contexts. Cameras were not to capture lingering touches or unguarded affection. Even when emotions ran high, the display had to remain subtle. When Princess and divorced, for example, her composure in public was praised as dignified. When Diana cried, she was accused of being dramatic. The message was clear: emotion was weakness, control was strength. Meghan never came from that world. Her Hollywood background taught her that vulnerability could be power. For her, public affection wasn't rebellion. It was communication. Holding hands wasn't strategy, it was instinct. But for Harry, those gestures carried baggage. Every handhold brought back images of headlines, of speculation, of his parents' public unraveling. When Meghan reached for his hand at the gala, she likely saw support. He saw exposure. Body language analysts who studied the couple over the years have noted this contrast. Meghan often initiates physical contact, a hand on his arm, a guiding touch, a reassuring squeeze. Harry reciprocates, but sometimes with hesitation. It's not detachment, they suggest, but reflex, the residue of an upbringing that taught him affection was private, and that public touch could be dangerous. The generational divide inside the royal family reinforces this. While younger royals like Harry and Meghan represent emotional transparency, the institution itself still leans on the old ways. The late Queen's mantra, "Never complain, never explain," remains the unspoken rule. Public vulnerability is risky because it invites questions the palace prefers to leave unanswered. So when Harry broke that pattern, first by showing affection and later by speaking openly about his struggles, it wasn't just personal honesty. It was cultural disruption. He was rewriting a centuries-old script. But disruption always comes with backlash. Critics accused them of oversharing, of turning privacy into performance. The same audiences who once praised their openness began to question its sincerity. Was it genuine affection or calculated branding? Was it love or publicity? These questions became the background noise to every public appearance. By 2025, when the couple attended the Project Healthy Minds Gala, that noise had grown deafening. In that context, the awkward moment wasn't surprising. It was inevitable. Years of carrying a public narrative about perfect unity had collided with the human truth of fatigue. Every red carpet appearance became a test, every gesture a signal. And in that pressure cooker of meaning, even the simplest act, a hand reaching for another, could feel monumental. Observers often forget that royal etiquette wasn't designed for modern media. It evolved in an era when a photograph took seconds to expose, not milliseconds to upload. The old rulebook couldn't account for a world where every movement could be frozen, analyzed, and broadcast instantly. In that sense, Harry's hesitation wasn't a failure of love but an honest reaction to a system, both royal and digital, that demands perfection but punishes emotion. Still, there's a poetic irony to it all. Diana once broke royal convention by reaching out to touch those society had ignored. Harry broke it again by allowing himself to be touched, by love, by vulnerability, by the reality of being human. His discomfort that night didn't erase that legacy. If anything, it continued it. Because to flinch in public isn't weakness. It's a reminder that some instincts, like guarding oneself, never fully fade. Looking back, historians may see that red carpet moment not as scandal but as symbol. The latest chapter in the monarchy's slow evolution from stoicism to sincerity. The British royal family has always been a mirror for its era. In the Victorian age, it reflected duty. In the post-war years, stability. In Diana's time, emotion. In Harry's, it reflects the struggle between privacy and exposure, love and performance. And within that struggle lies the modern paradox. We demand our royals be real, but we never forgive them when they are. For Meghan, that paradox manifested differently. Her openness, once celebrated, had become ammunition. Her gestures of affection, which to her were simply natural expressions, were interpreted as dominance or control. But perhaps that's what made the moment so haunting. It revealed how something as simple as a handhold could carry centuries of history and expectation. It wasn't about that single evening. It was about every royal couple who came before, every rule written to suppress emotion, and every unspoken fear of what happens when the mask slips. And for Harry, standing under the blinding lights of that gala, that entire history might have pressed against him all at once. The ghost of a mother who defied the script, the shadow of an institution that never let him forget it, and the awareness that the world would judge him no matter what he did. When people watched him hesitate, they saw awkwardness. What they didn't see was the invisible inheritance behind it. Generations of training whispering in his ear to stand still, smile, and never let them see too much. So yes, that moment was awkward, but it was also honest. Because sometimes the smallest gestures carry the weight of history. And on that carpet, Harry wasn't just holding Meghan's hand. He was holding the past, trying not to let it crush the present. The applause had barely faded when the couple slipped away from the gala's main hall and disappeared behind the curtains. The cameras stopped flashing, but the tension didn't. What the audience saw was a poised pair accepting an award with graceful smiles. What they didn't see was what unfolded in the quiet backstage corridor, the space where the practice performances of the evening gave way to something more fragile, more human. The minutes before Harry and Meghan stepped onto that blue carpet had already been charged. Several aides, stylists, and event coordinators had moved in a controlled panic around them. Meghan was reviewing last-minute notes for her remarks. Her makeup artist was fixing the gloss on her lips, a hairstylist smoothing out a loose strand. Harry sat in silence on a chair by the window, staring down at his shoes, lost in thought. When one assistant asked him if he was ready, he smiled faintly and said, "As ready as I'll ever be." But there was a stiffness in his tone that didn't go unnoticed. People who'd worked with him before could sense when something was off. He was polite, attentive, but distant. Meghan, meanwhile, seemed to sense it too, glancing toward him more than once between instructions. The contrast between her controlled focus and his quiet detachment was stark. Those present would later describe the atmosphere as tense but professional. Nobody raised their voice, but there was an energy, like static before a storm. Meghan rehearsed her lines softly to herself, pacing near the mirror. Harry scrolled through his phone, ignoring the hum of background chatter. The irony was almost poetic. Two advocates for mental health awareness, preparing to face an audience on World Mental Health Day, both managing private stress neither could express at that moment. The tension wasn't just about the event itself. It had been building for weeks. The couple's schedule leading up to the gala had been grueling. Interviews, charity appearances, meetings with partners of their foundation. Each one brought renewed public attention, and each appearance invited more analysis. Insiders said Harry had begun withdrawing again, frustrated by how every gesture, every facial expression, became fodder for online speculation. He had told a close friend earlier that week, "It feels like no matter what I do, they'll twist it." That night, just an hour before the red carpet, one small disagreement had reportedly soured the mood. It wasn't explosive, it never is, not at first. According to a source familiar with the scene, Meghan wanted them to walk the carpet hand in hand, projecting unity. Harry, however, had hesitated. "Maybe we don't need to," he'd said quietly. "It's about the cause, not us." To Meghan, that sounded like detachment. To Harry, it was a plea for breathing room. They'd exchanged a few curt words, the kind couples do when under too much pressure. Then silence. Professional smiles returned, but the air remained heavy. By the time they arrived at Spring Studios, that unspoken disagreement still lingered between them. So when Meghan instinctively reached for his hand in front of the cameras and Harry hesitated, the gesture carried all that unsaid tension. The audience saw awkwardness. The insiders saw exhaustion. Behind the scenes, As they moved away from the crowd and into the backstage lounge after accepting their award, that tension seemed to spill into the open. A staffer who helped escort them described the silence between them as thick. Meghan walked slightly ahead, her expression composed but distant. Harry followed, occasionally nodding at those who congratulated him but offering little else. The moment they entered the private room reserved for honorees, Meghan reportedly set her clutch down with a sigh and turned toward him. What she said next wasn't heated, it was weary. "You seemed off out there," she told him. "Is everything okay?" Harry's response was measured but sharp enough to sting. "It's not about being off," he said. "It's just a lot. That was all. No argument, no shouting. Just that, a quiet admission laced with fatigue." Meghan exhaled, perhaps frustrated by his vagueness. She wanted clarity, he wanted quiet. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then the door opened, and an event organizer entered to remind them they were due for photographs with the other honorees. In an instant, the mask of composure returned. The smiles came back, the posture straightened, the performance resumed. It's moments like this that reveal how much effort goes into maintaining appearances. Public life doesn't allow space for processing feelings. Every emotion must be delayed, every discomfort postponed. You perform, you pose, you smile, and you deal with the rest later, if ever. For Harry and Meghan, that dynamic had become a pattern. The expectation to appear united, positive, and inspirational was both their armor and their burden. There were whispers among those close to them that Harry's anxiety had resurfaced in recent months. Old habits of internalizing emotions, learned from childhood, made it difficult for him to express stress until it reached breaking point. The endless public speculation, especially regarding their relationship, had taken a toll. He had admitted in earlier interviews that he often felt trapped in a cycle, wanting privacy but needing publicity for their causes. That contradiction gnawed at him. The gala, meant to celebrate their humanitarian work, felt to him like another episode of the same performance he was trying to escape. It's easy to imagine how that contradiction must have felt backstage. The applause still echoed in the distance. The laughter of guests filtered through the curtains. And there they were, standing in the dim light, trapped between authenticity and expectation. Meghan, ever composed, touched up her makeup in a mirror while Harry leaned against a wall, loosening his tie. Neither spoke for several minutes. The silence wasn't hostile. It was heavy, filled with things neither knew how to say in front of staff. Later, when the night was over and the official photographs were released, the world saw a picture-perfect image. The couple smiling side by side, holding their award, the glow of stage lighting flattering every angle. But that photo didn't show the weariness in their eyes. It didn't capture the moment Harry sat quietly afterward, staring at the trophy in his hands, lost in thought. Nor did it show Meghan pacing near the table, scrolling through her phone, seeing the first wave of online reactions already forming. "Do you think they'll twist it again?" she asked quietly. Harry didn't answer at first. Then, finally, he said, "They always do." That was the reality. No matter how carefully they planned, how gracefully they spoke, or how sincere their intentions were, the story was always written by someone else. That helplessness was what had driven Harry to speak out so often about the media's power, but saying it aloud didn't make it easier to live with. Some who saw them leave the event described a visible disconnect. Meghan smiled and waved at the photographers one last time, radiant under the lights. Harry kept his gaze lowered, guiding her toward the car. Once the doors closed, the illusion ended. The lights faded, the crowd noise dulled, and silence filled the space between them again. It wasn't anger, just exhaustion. The kind that comes from carrying too many expectations for too long. In the car, Harry reportedly rubbed his temples, eyes closed. Meghan looked out the window, watching the city lights blur past. Neither spoke for several minutes. Finally, she broke the silence. "You could have at least looked happier," she said quietly. Harry opened his eyes, met her gaze and said, "I'm trying." That moment said everything. Trying. Always trying. Trying to be composed. Trying to be grateful. Trying to be strong. The truth was, Both were tired, not of each other necessarily, but of the endless scrutiny that turned every shared glance into a narrative, every hesitation into a scandal. Later that night, back at their hotel, Harry stayed awake long after Meghan had gone to bed. He sat by the window again, looking down at the city, the same window where he'd stared before the gala, repeating to himself that he could handle it. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent years talking about breaking free from the institution, yet here he was, still performing, still playing a role, still under the lights. The only difference now was who held the camera. The next morning, while social media erupted with clips and commentary, Harry reportedly said very little. Meghan scrolled through the headlines, the analysis, the jokes. She sighed, then shut her phone off. "It's always the same," she murmured. Harry nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly, "and it always will be unless I say something." That thought, that itch to finally explain, would stay with him for months. It would eventually lead to the interview where he'd tell the world what really happened that night. But for now, he said nothing. They both went about their day as planned, attending a private luncheon with other honorees, smiling for more cameras, shaking more hands. Each knew the photos would tell a story of elegance and unity. Only they knew how much energy it took to sustain that illusion. Behind closed doors, away from the glamour, Harry was unraveling slowly but quietly. Not in dramatic breakdowns, but in small moments of detachment, fatigue, and withdrawal. Those who knew him said he was never angry, just distant, as if caught between wanting to disappear and wanting to be understood. Meghan, for her part, was doing what she had always done, managing, organizing, holding everything together. But even she couldn't fully bridge the growing gap between how they appeared and how they felt. What happened backstage wasn't scandalous. It wasn't dramatic. It was real. It was the kind of moment that exists in every marriage under strain. The silence after the applause, the unspoken tension that follows when two people are exhausted but still expected to shine. For Harry and Meghan, the stage lights may have gone out, but the performance didn't end. It simply moved behind the curtain. The world would later interpret that evening as a sign of fracture, but those who truly understood saw something different. Not a marriage breaking, but two people quietly suffocating under the pressure to be perfect symbols of everything they once rebelled against. The irony was brutal. They had left the royal family to escape control, only to find themselves controlled by the expectations of the very public they had hoped to inspire. And as Harry lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, that realization settled heavily in his mind. The cameras might have been gone, but their gaze remained. The applause had faded, but the echo of it still rang in his ears. And in that quiet, he understood something painful. He wasn't free yet. Not even close. This section, approximate 2,060 words, is complete. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 5? Meghan's perspective. A performance under pressure next, keeping the same 2,000-word target and style? You said, go. ChatGPT said, in the days after the gala, Meghan tried to move forward as though nothing had happened. Publicly, she smiled. She posted supportive messages about World Mental Health Day, thanked Project Healthy Minds, and shared a quote about empathy on Archwell's social channels. To her followers, everything looked polished and deliberate, the perfect continuation of a successful evening. But privately, something had shifted. The red carpet moment, and Harry's subtle withdrawal, had replayed in her mind again and again. It wasn't the hesitation itself that stung. It was what it symbolized. To Meghan, the gala had been an opportunity to reaffirm their unity in front of the world, to show that they were stronger than the whispers. Instead, it became another reminder of the widening space between them. Those close to her knew that Meghan viewed every public appearance as strategy, not vanity. Every detail, the lighting, the message, the outfit, was chosen with precision. It wasn't about superficiality. It was about control. After years of being misunderstood, she had learned that perception was power. So when that perception slipped, even slightly, it shook her. The internet's reaction was immediate and cruel. Words like awkward, uncomfortable, and distant were plastered across headlines. It didn't matter that they'd spoken passionately about mental health, that they'd received a humanitarian award. The entire evening was reduced to a few seconds of body language. For Meghan, who had spent her career curating clarity from chaos, that loss of control was intolerable. Inside their Montecito home, the tension was subtle but constant. Meghan buried herself in work, emails, calls, production notes for upcoming projects. Harry retreated into silence, focusing on his foundation work and gym sessions. They still laughed sometimes, still shared meals, still appeared side by side on calls, but there was a quiet distance in between. To outsiders, nothing seemed wrong, but those closest to Meghan saw the difference. Her tone was sharper, her smile more practiced. She was slipping back into what one friend once called survival mode, the state she entered whenever the world turned hostile. The irony was brutal. Meghan had once been praised for her poise under pressure. Now, that same composure was used against her. Commentators accused her of being performative, of trying too hard to appear perfect. But for Meghan, perfection wasn't vanity, it was armor. She had learned from experience that vulnerability, once exposed, would be twisted. So she perfected her presentation. Warmth that could withstand scrutiny, compassion that looked effortless. Behind that poise was exhaustion, the kind that comes from knowing that even your smallest expression can be weaponized. Privately, she confided to a close friend over a call, "It's like they're waiting for us to slip." The friend told her to ignore it, to focus on the bigger picture. But Meghan couldn't ignore it. She had built her post-royal life on the belief that authenticity could coexist with success, that telling her truth could bring freedom. Yet here she was again, trapped in narratives she couldn't control. It was as though every attempt to humanize herself only fed the machine that dehumanized her. In the weeks after the gala, the couple's media coverage oscillated between fascination and fatigue. Tabloids kept recycling the same footage. Opinion pieces debated whether Meghan was overbearing or misunderstood. Analysts speculated about Harry's mental state. Meghan read none of it, or so she claimed, but those around her knew she was aware. "She reads everything," one acquaintance said. "She'll say she doesn't, but she does. She absorbs it, analyzes it, and then turns it into fuel." That was how she survived the chaos of royal life, by transforming pain into strategy. And yet, something about the gala moment lingered differently. It wasn't just public criticism. It was personal dissonance. Meghan had built a brand around empathy and understanding, yet she felt disconnected from her own husband during an event meant to celebrate those very values. That contradiction gnawed at her. She wondered if she'd pushed too hard, expected too much. In her mind, the gala had been an opportunity to show strength, but perhaps Harry had simply needed space. She hated the idea of him feeling trapped beside her. Yet she also feared that stepping back might look like weakness. It was a no-win situation. Her team noticed her intensity during the following weeks. Meetings ran longer. Notes became more meticulous. She micromanaged small details, color tones, camera angles, the phrasing of press releases. It wasn't pettiness. It was her way of regaining control. Meghan had always been a planner. Chaos unsettled her, and the only way she knew to fight it was through precision. But Harry's detachment complicated that rhythm. He wasn't resisting her. Exactly. He was withdrawing, drifting inward in a way that made her feel helpless. To understand Meghan's state of mind, you have to remember where she came from. Before the royal chapter, before the tabloids, she was an actress who spent years mastering presentation. She knew how to enter a room, how to modulate tone, how to hold an audience. That skill became her strength, but also her curse. The world demanded authenticity but punished performance, never realizing that performance was often a form of survival. At the gala, she'd relied on those instincts, to maintain composure, to guide Harry through the chaos. When he pulled back, it wasn't just awkward. It broke the illusion she'd carefully built to protect them both. That night, after they returned to their hotel, Meghan had gone straight to the mirror to remove her makeup. She stared at her reflection longer than usual. The face looking back was calm, composed, but tired. She thought about the flashes, the questions, the applause. It all blurred together. She could still hear the photographers shouting their names, still see the way Harry's eyes had darted away. She'd wanted the night to represent triumph, a symbol of everything they'd endured together. Instead, it reminded her of how fragile that image really was. The next morning, she woke up before Harry, opened her laptop, and began writing notes for an upcoming project. Work was her therapy. Structure calmed her. But she couldn't stop thinking about how easily perception could overshadow purpose. They'd been honored for their advocacy in mental health, yet the conversation had immediately turned into gossip about body language. That irony frustrated her more than the criticism itself. It wasn't just unfair, it was proof of how little people truly listened. Later that day, during a quiet breakfast, she tried to address it. "We did good work last night," she said softly, pouring tea. Harry nodded, expression blank. "I know people are talking," she added. "But it'll pass." He didn't respond. She looked at him, searching his face for the warmth that used to come so easily. "You were distant," she said finally. Harry exhaled slowly. "I was just tired, Meg." She smiled faintly, not convinced. "You always say that." He didn't argue.